companies don't get sold, they get bought. If you put the for sale sign up on a company, it's probably a bad sign. It's probably game over.
Welcome to the Nicholas Vitale Show. Today, we're diving into the world of tech, innovation, and leadership with our esteemed guest, Mike Trigg. Mike is a seasoned executive from Silicon Valley with an impressive track record in marketing, sales, and customer service, not to mention his ventures into the realm of fiction writing. Sprinkle that in there. He's got an MBA from UC Berkeley and hands-on experience at the forefront of technological evolution. Mike's insights are a treasure trove for anyone interested in the pulse of what's going on in Silicon Valley and entrepreneurship as a whole. Riddle of the week: how do you make a waterbed bouncier? Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out. Let's dive in. This is the Nicholas Vitale Show. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Really a pleasure to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I'm going to waste no time. We're going to jump right in, and we're going to start at the early days of your career. The first startup you joined was acquired for over the big 3B, the old 3 Billy, and it was at the peak of the bubble. And my question around that is that something that inspired the idea of companies can get acquired, and this might be giving me the itch to jump on my own train here? Give me the breakdown.
Absolutely. I moved out to Silicon Valley in '96, went to business school for 2 years, and joined this company called Octane Software in the heat of the dot-com boom. So, in today's dollars, that would be about 40-50 million. Everything was super inflated at the time. But it definitely was a weird entry into life in Silicon Valley because it, for me, in a way, in hindsight, taught me a bad lesson, which is, this is easy, right? You just prop up a company, you go sell it for billions of dollars, and you ride off on your yacht into the sunset. Bam, exactly. I hadn't lived through enough bubbles at the time to know that was a bubble, and that we were experiencing then was a anomaly. And I remember seeing executives at that company selling stock. And I was like, gosh, why are they selling stock? It's only going to go up. Why would you do that? And, hindsight being 2020, I wish I'd sold more stock. So it was a very weird time. I think that also really had been my itch since literally a child. One of my most early entrepreneurial endeavors, I invented a dice role-playing game when I was a little kid, and printed up manuals of the rules, and we played it with friends. And that was one of the first times that I kind of invented something out of nothing, out of an idea. Yeah. And it just gave me such a rush. It gave me such a charge that I kind of knew that was what I wanted to do. And, that was what led me to business school, led me to the Bay Area, got me into tech, et cetera. So
that's amazing. I have found that many entrepreneurs that I've met, they find the itch early. Like they're doing something early, whether it's a lemonade stand. I was slinging candy bars out of my backpack at lunch, potato chips, whatever it may be. But I like that it starts early because I feel like it fosters a mindset of like, I can create things. I can just have this creativity that brings value to other people. And that's kind of the basis of a lot of great businesses, is bringing value to people that currently don't have something.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And I think that's what you need to enjoy. Like if you really want to be an entrepreneur, that you have to enjoy that part of it. Actually, when I pivoted into writing books full time a few years ago, I sort of thought at the time like, I'm doing something completely different now. And then I started doing it. And I was like, oh no, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm creating something out of an idea. I'm using a keyboard to capture that idea and make it a reality. I'm evangelizing that idea and pitching it to people and trying to get, investors or agents or publishers or all those kinds of things. The muscle groups were actually surprisingly similar, and the enjoyment that I derived from it personally was exactly the same, which is, hey, here's an idea in my head. It might be a cockamamie idea. I don't know if it's good or not, but I love it. I'm passionate about it. I want to see it come to fruition. That, for me, is the most exciting part of the journey. I like to describe myself as an early stage entrepreneur. That's the part of the process that I like the most, when you're kind of balling up this primordial ooze and trying to turn it into something that people actually want.
Hey, what's going on? It's Nick. Many folks inquire how they can support the podcast. You can do so by leaving a 5-star review on the platform you're listening on. That's always a good way to go. Goes a long way, and it's free. Or you can subscribe to our Patreon to have access to early released episodes at patreon.com/Nicholas Vitale. Wanted to answer that quick FAQ for you. All right, back to the episode. I have that written down about you, Mike, that early stage is your favorite. That is like the most exciting. It can be the most exciting, but also that's where a lot of them die. That's where they fall to their death. What are the common things you've seen for early stages? What kills a great company before they even get off the ground?
It's a super interesting stage for me because it's this balance that you have to strike between faith and proof, if that makes sense. So you kind of have to have an intuition for the good idea, whether it's an app or a website or whatever it is, a book, music, anything creative. You just kind of have to trust your gut early stage. But you also need to, quite early in the process, validate that idea. There can be a sort of a bashfulness or shame about sharing your idea when you feel like it's really rough and it's not totally thought through and it might not be good and all the doubts and uncertainties you have about it. But that's the right time to do it, when you still can affect change on the design or the story or whatever it is that you're creating. I always, as a product person, doing tech startups, I always tried to validate ideas very early with target users, get them mock-ups that they could actually play with, do customer focus interviews, one-on-ones, just really understand the problem, really understand what they need that app to do for it to be something that they feel like they can't live without. And I do the same thing with my books. With the first book, I was kind of like, oh gosh, I'm sort of embarrassed to share this with people. I don't know what they'll think. I finally, did that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was so valuable to have people read it and say, hey, I'm totally confused by this character, or this plot point doesn't make sense. With my second book, and now I'm writing my third book, I've been much more deliberate with that, where I call them beta readers. I have a set of trusted people who I know are voracious readers and I feel like will give me honest feedback, good, bad, and ugly. I thank those people in my acknowledgments because they're pivotal to the writing process. They read the book even before my editor reads the book. And so that kind of gives you a sense of, I want that sort of raw early feedback when I still have the chance to incorporate it into the story.
Feedback is amazing. I feel like it's the most amazing when you're licking your wounds a little bit.
Yeah. I sort of have a trite view of it. If you're not licking your wounds, you didn't get good feedback. Like nothing comes out of the creative process with angels strumming harps and beams of light, perfect. It always is going to be rough. And as a creator, you can't see what you can't see. You just get so close to it. You have this sort of unwavering belief that your idea is great, but you have to couple that with the humility and the perspective for other people to tell you, hey, I didn't get this part. And maybe some of those ideas still are great, but you're not communicating or expressing them, or your UI is wrong, or whatever it is, but it's not working. And ultimately, that's what matters. The buyer, the reader, the consumer of the thing that you're creating, you want it to resonate with people. Like as a creator, part of me wants it to be what I want it to be, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's only what I want it to be and people don't like the book, then it's not going to get readers. And so I need to strike that balance between sort of, an artist's purity and something that is, for me, it's not about sort of commercial success. It's about getting the message of the book out. My books all have a strong cautionary tale, if you will, to them. And I want that discussion, I want that dialogue to get out into the world and to be thought-provoking for people. And if they aren't inspired enough to read the entire book, then it's not going to achieve that.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlaps there with everything you're talking about. It's something that comes to my mind that I love your thoughts on. I've thought about at length the feedback channels between, let's say, manager to employee or even employee to manager. But what I've actually seen a lot of difficulty in there being friction points is like peer-to-peer feedback. Let's say you founded 3 companies before, or been a founder in 3 companies. You got your team of founders, all peers. How do you orchestrate that type of feedback? Because I think you're exactly right. If feedback isn't part of this and we don't build that culture or relationship to do that, the end message, people aren't going to read through the whole book or get what they need from the book out of it. The peer-to-peer feedback world, what are your thoughts on creating some of that feedback loop?
Well, I agree with you. It's very important. I think that one of the ways you can foster that is to have clear roles between those peers, right? I'll mention a company that I co-founded with some guys who are still close friends of mine. I can say this without any concern, but we all had the same skill set. We were all sort of business MBA types, right? And so for the five of us, we really were peers. We didn't have somebody who was the technical lead, somebody who's the customer lead, somebody who's the sales lead, somebody who's the marketing lead. We kind of had this big overlap in skill sets. And that company didn't go anywhere, right? Because we just couldn't, it was too hard for us to make decisions. It was too hard for us we were sort of running it like a democracy, and we didn't have distinct lanes. So that for me was a big lesson. The next company after that I founded, I was the founder, right? I didn't use the term co-founder, even though I very much thought of the people who joined early on as co-founders effectively. I wanted easier decision making because I think that that's important early on in a company. But most importantly, I hired people who could do stuff that I could do like 0% of what their their jobs entailed, right? I had a developer who like all things tech, I deferred to him. I had a designer, so all things design-wise, I deferred to her. So, I could still opine as the founder and the CEO, but, it made it a lot easier to make decisions, to give feedback, because we each trusted each other in our respective disciplines and domains. That is a mistake a lot of early stage companies make is, and frankly, it's a function of necessity sometimes. You're trying to get some critical mass, and so your buddies who are interested get on board, and they can be the easiest people to recruit because they know you and they trust you. I think it's always important to set up sort of those organizational structures to make sure that you don't just sort of start to move sideways or get friction between people. That I've seen that happen where people who started as good friends and started a company don't talk anymore because they got so upset at each other over the course of the decision making that had to happen, and they didn't start down that path with clear roles and responsibilities defined. So I think that is key because every person you add to an early stage company is a slice of the pie. That's somebody else who's getting stock, that's somebody else who's maybe getting salary, even if you're taking low or minimal salaries early on. And even though it can feel additive to bring those people on board, sometimes it can be not additive, negative. It can make the decision-making process, the ability to make progress quickly, which is really the most important thing for any startup, harder to do.
Yeah, definitely. I resonate with many of the things you said. Did you have any difficulty transitioning into the full-time or the full CEO role? Because it looks like what I have previously is that's something you moved into, to be the sole guy. Yeah. Was there a transition? Did you have to change in any sort of way or change in your thinking?
That's always hard to do. You always feel, I think, CEO is sort of a little bit of a pretentious title when you're a 5-person company or whatever it is, right?
Feels like it, for sure.
And so I put that moniker on just because, investors and others like to see, really the question that they're asking is who is in charge? Who is the final decision maker? Yeah. And that title, sort of conveys that. To answer your question, not really. I think I feel like I have, when I talk about different people bringing their strengths to the organization, I've always felt like my strength was in that area, kind of leadership, communications, vision. Those are the kinds of things that I tend to gravitate towards and be good at. And so kind of understanding your own strengths, I think, is important too, because that can help inform what do you need around you, right? Some are easy. I'm not a coder, so I needed engineers. Yeah. Other areas are less obvious. A lot of my functional roles within organizations, as a VP and C-level executive were in marketing, but marketing itself is a highly fragmented discipline, just as is engineering, as is customer support, as is sales. There's a lot of sub areas of expertise that you need to develop. And so, even within a vocation like marketing that I felt like I knew well, I wanted to bring on people who had complementary skill sets to me, who had expertise in areas that were important to the business that I hadn't had as much of, So like, for example, a lot of my marketing was in more the B2B space where you're doing trade shows and you're doing brochures and you're doing buyer guides and things like that. I had less expertise in consumer internet where, important avenues are, SEM and social media and things like that. And so, you always need to be honest with yourself about what do you know, what do you not know, what could you learn? Because obviously sometimes it's useful for you or other people at an early stage company to just learn the shit you need to learn, right? You can't always hire an expert. You don't always have the ability to afford to do that when you're trying to be scrappy early stage. Having those that clear accountability is probably the summary word is really important.
That's so great. Those are all really great thoughts. And it comes to my mind when you say all that, whether it's like you need to dive into the details and learn what you need to learn, or be strategic in your decision making and who you're bringing on board, characteristics of an entrepreneur. And we talked about this slightly before we started getting going, that a lot of entrepreneurs, probably myself included, think we're going to be the one in a million. I'm going to have that hockey stick startup. Right. This is going to change the industry sort of thing. Are there certain beliefs or characteristics that you think an entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur should, these are, oh man, all these should words, should hold, or like maybe even seen a recognition and pattern of like, these are core traits that some of the most successful startup survivors have? Do any traits come to mind?
I think there's the two I'd identify, and they're almost contradictory, is ego and humility. You know, you need to have the ego part because you need to believe your idea is great. You need to persevere through thousands of people telling you your idea is shitty. You have to maintain that belief, maintain that devotion, that commitment, that never say die attitude. And yet you can't tip into stubborn, obstinate, you know, all the other traits that tend to go along with that ego-driven, you know, belief. You need to listen to other people. You need to trust others' expertise. You need to incorporate feedback from users and customers and investors. And that is really hard to find. I'll tell you, I dabble in a little bit of angel investing at this stage of my career. Oftentimes I feel like I talk to entrepreneurs who kind of tip one way or the other. You know, they kind of tip too much towards, you know, my idea or the highway, almost a vanity level of belief in what they're doing. And other people who lack the courage of their conviction a little bit, you know, are too easily kind of swayed one way or the other based on what they hear that afternoon from an investor. You'll get, as an entrepreneur, especially when you're in the fundraising process, you get no shortage of opinions about which way you should take the business. You know, everybody has one. It's very easy to find yourself kind of pulled in 50 different directions, or trying to appease or satisfy what one person based on the 15 minutes they've thought about your company thinks you should do. You know, everybody's kind of an armchair quarterback. And so that's where you need that ego part of it to say, no, I trust my gut at this level. I think this part of the business that we're doing this way is the right decision. And, you know, I may be proven wrong in the future, but I'm not going to flip-flop around and try to satisfy everybody.
Yeah. A lot of that for me comes down to, have they noodled on it as much as I've noodled on it? Like, are
no
they,
chance.
They haven't seen like the little details that, or the reason why these other things are happening. Yeah. I think a lot of that plays into it.
In the companies I've been at that haven't made it, that haven't been successful, I think we didn't do a good enough job early on identifying sort of what are the critical success factors. You know, what are the things that are going to make this business go or not go? Getting the things that will make it go done, and figuring out answers for the things that are existential threats for the company. That is all that matters. And it's very easy as an entrepreneur to get distracted. It's very easy to get pulled in a lot of different directions. But I think if you're very clear with yourself and with your founding team and your investors as you bring them on board about what those critical success factors are, that can be a helpful compass for you, because otherwise you're kind of just floating through the ocean of a million things you should be doing. All of them are important, you know, but you need to really double down, triple down on the few things that are of critical survival importance. You know, I mean, it's a really vicious, challenging, low odds endeavor. And, you know, it's sort of like getting dropped into the desert with a backpack. You know, what are the things you need to survive, you know, and those are the only things that you should be paying attention to. It's hard to do. I've, you know, had many moments myself where I've recognized, hey, I'm not doing that. I got to get back focused on the things that matter. That's really, really important as well, and a trait that I look for in entrepreneurs.
That's so great. I'm in the early stages of my own startup here, and one of the founders, I feel like he says this every meeting, which for better or for worse, he's like,
hopefully he's not listening.
Yeah. He's like, this is a 1% chance of being successful every time. That's very true. But it's him saying that has also helped us do what you're saying of like, as a 1% success rate, what are all the things that's going to kill us? And since a lot of our team is part-time in this too, there really is like, no, you can't waste any time doing something that doesn't matter. So identifying those things too.
And I think this is the other thing I tell every entrepreneur is enjoy the journey, not the destination, because, you know, you say 1% and you're probably right. for getting to just the next stage. And then you face another 1 in 100 battle. And then you face another 1 in 100 battle, right? Like, I think every successful entrepreneur will tell you, like, hey, we got our angel funding. We felt like it was great. Then it was so hard to get our Series A. It was so hard to get our Series B. Even when your company goes public, there's never a point where it's like kick back and easy street, right? Running businesses is a survival of the fittest race at every stage of that company's evolution. And what's going to make it successful early stages is going to be totally different at mid stages and totally different again at late stages. I think that's another thing I've seen companies struggle with is they hit a milestone that's an important one, certain amount of revenue or, Series A term sheet or whatever it is. It's great. That's a chance to high five and pop the champagne and celebrate a little bit. But you got to immediately go back to work the next day and know, okay, I've got 50 more mountains to climb. Like, this is just the beginning. It's just a milestone. I'm not at the peak yet. So, and frankly, there's never a peak. I mean, go ask Google and Meta and any of the most successful companies in the tech space. They're all, fearing for their lives right now as multi-billion-dollar, if not trillion-dollar plus companies. And so the founder of Intel, only the paranoid survive, that is true at every stage. Sort of, again, relishing that, enjoying that part of the journey, that reality of being an entrepreneur is something you got to have and you got to prepare yourself for, right? It is a marathon, not a sprint, for sure.
Entrepreneurs that love to play the game are fueled by the fact that it never ends. Like they get to the milestone and they're stoked there's more.
Another big one that you see, this sort of a negative that is turned into a positive by some entrepreneurs is a bit of a chip on their shoulder, right? You see this with athletes too. Like the athletes that, I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan and, I loved Aaron Rodgers' story. He didn't get drafted early in the draft and he just carried that chip on his shoulder throughout his NFL career and won Super Bowls and MVPs, right? And Tom Brady, obviously, a good example. Like oftentimes successful entrepreneurs have a little bit of that, I will effing show you, like deep, deep, deep chip on their shoulder, desire to prove people wrong. And, that's the ego part of it for sure, but you need some of that sometimes to fuel you, to keep you motivated, to inspire your team. That is the kind of belief, to phrase it in a more positive way, can carry companies through rough patches.
It also fuels the risk too. The willingness to take risk and have a high enough risk tolerance to know when to do it. Like if you have that chip on your shoulder and that gall even, I'm willing to place that bet. I'm willing to bet on this company. I'm willing to put in my resources to make this work. Whatever that bet looks like, I think entrepreneurs have to have a bit of risk tolerance involved.
Yeah, I think you need to be risk loving, right? I mean, I think you need to, you need to have a little bit of psychosis in you. Anyone who steps back and rationally looks at the odds of success, just numerically on paper, how many companies founded? How many companies get a seed funding? How many companies get a Series A? How many companies make it to IPO? I mean, it is infinitesimally long odds. Not every company has to go through those stages. I'm sort of oriented towards those because I and probably a lot of your listeners, do tech startups and are venture-backed and other kinds of things. There are plenty of businesses in the world. In fact, the vast majority of businesses in the world aren't venture fundable businesses. They don't really have that hockey stick potential that makes them a venture fundable business. There's plenty of paths to a successful company. I think that's another important question for any entrepreneur is to be honest with themselves about what the characteristics of that business are. Does it have that real, venture growth kind of potential? Or is it more of a lifestyle business? Is it a business that you can get to profitability quickly and you can start kicking off cash and making money off it that way? Totally different profiles for every type of company out there.
That's a great distinction too. A lifestyle business versus in the weeds, 90 hours a week, very different strategies toward growing a business.
I've been an EIR with venture funds, an advisor to venture funds. I've never been a partner at a venture fund, so I don't really know what I'm talking about on the investment side. But for the most part, when companies say no to a deal after doing due diligence, right? If they say no right away, it just doesn't fit what they think is interesting, or there's a bunch of reasons that they could cancel it out. If an investor kicks the tires, looks at the deal, has a couple meetings with you, has you in front of their partners, et cetera, and say no, most often the answer is they don't think it has really that hockey stick potential, right? That there's either something sort of flawed about the business model or something that could, a competitor perhaps that could come along and just steal all the cookies and take the whole business away, whatever it is, they just don't feel like it has that profile that a venture investor really needs to see which is, everything they put money into has to have the potential to give them a 10x plus return, because most of them won't. They'll go out, 7 out of 10 will go out of business. 1 or 2 might return even capital or pennies on the dollar. And hopefully they get 1 out of 10 that, returns the fund. And so point is, at the outset, each of the companies they put money into has to fit that profile. They have to have conviction that that potential exists with right execution, right product, et cetera. That potential exists to be a hockey stick growth kind of company. Usually when you hear a no at that stage, that's the answer. For a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't sort of ask that next question of like, what would I need to show you to give you conviction on that front? That is the answer to what milestones do you need to hit for your next phase of funding, right? Yeah. Because those are the things that every investor will be scratching their heads about. And those are the things, back to, critical success factors, those are the things that you need to get onto your critical success factors list so that you can prove to yourself, to your investors, to your prospective investors and customers that you've got a strong, viable business.
This is a perfect segue, Mike, into what's going on with the investor world. This is what I know. I don't know much, so please fill me in on the deets. I know that cash is hard to come by for investments because interest rates are rising, but I also know that if it has the word AI in it, you might get lucky here with, with some investment money. What's going on in that world?
It's really weird. I actually think there's a parallel, as there often is, between the public markets and the private equity markets right now. You look at the public markets, there's this annoying term of the Magnificent Seven. If you look at a lot of the growth in the stock market, it's happening from 7 stocks. It's NVIDIA, it's Meta, it's Google, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon and Tesla, and I'm forgetting one of them. But, the point is capital has gotten really, really concentrated in a small number of deals. And I think you're seeing kind of the same thing happen in the private equity, venture capital markets right now, where the vast majority of businesses are just kind of uninteresting to them. They don't feel like they have that hockey stick potential. I think in the area that I spent most of my career in, I did a little hardware, but I was mostly on the software side. Within software companies, I used to joke like, man, every day I log in and I read about 3-4 new companies that are doing the exact thing that we're doing. The barriers to entry on software is extremely low. A couple guys in Latvia can whip up just about any app that you want over a weekend. I just think it becomes very, very hard to make those businesses venture fundable because most likely they're kind of scraping and scratching and clawing their way. AI as a category has gained a measure of that sort of concentration of capital, concentration of investment. Plenty of people in the VC world would readily admit we're throwing spaghetti against the wall. I think, anytime you see sort of a transformative technology like this, and by the way, I was doing AI stuff well before ChatGPT. There's something that specifically happened around generative AI, I think, that really captured, widespread imagination and catalyzed a lot of interest in this sort of sub-discipline within AI overall. I think a lot of those bets will be busts. There's capital flowing into those companies at huge valuations. The big thing that is a warning flag for me is what's the problem you're solving, right? You hear a lot of AI companies just babble about what their tech can do without any iota of thought about what the customer problem is that they're solving. And so, I gravitate much more towards businesses that are thoughtful and deliberate about how they are applying AI to solve a specific business problem versus just a technology looking for a problem.
The short-term versus it seems like short-term versus long-term vision. Like, we're going to make this really cool technology because we want to focus on it and play with it and see if we can get money to mess around with it, versus if I'm solving a problem, there's usually that long tail end that we talked about earlier of like, this is going to bring value to folks that actually have something that they need solving for. AI is such a great space to be in, but also so buzzy. What do we do with some of the fluff around it where people are claiming there's AI in their company? And it's like, you might be using ChatGPT on the background, or, you're prompt engineering for your spreadsheets or something. What do we do with all of that information?
Ultimately, it's up to the investment community to separate the posers from the real technology. That all said, what I said a moment before I think holds true. I'd rather invest in something that business problems that not technologies, right? And so I don't mind companies that have taken technology, licensed it, or open source technology or libraries or whatever it might be, and applied it to a specific business problem, right? You almost always see AI, do a better job, impress you more, deliver more value, et cetera, when it is applied to a specific problem versus when it's generalized. That to me is the companies that are going to make it are the ones that focus on a market that's a big enough market that they can really scale with it, right? It can't be whatever, write your dog obituary or something like that. I mean, it's got to be a big enough market. Then you can really refine the tool and the technology itself that enables it kind of becomes a background thing. I mean, you go get in your car and you don't think much about the engine and it just kind of goes, right?
Yeah.
What you interface with as an end user is what's important to you. And so this gets back to personnel too, right? You either have that, world-class AI technical person on your team, or you are yourself, or you don't, right? I mean, and so that's another area where I think you need to be kind of honest with yourself of like, do we have the world-class engineering talent to really deliver something unique and proprietary in this space? I'm going to bet no, because there's only a handful of those people in the world. And that's why they, get handed fat checks to do companies. So in those cases, it can be better off not trying to be that, not trying to be something you're not, but, leverage those technologies, sort of off-the-shelf technologies to build something cool and unique.
This brings me to my next question around, it's similar in nature. But for Russell, when you were the CEO, did you build Russell in mind with being acquired at some point? And is there a difference in how you build your startup if your attempt is to be acquired versus to play the game for as long as you can?
Well, so let me answer those two separately. So Russell was a company that I was kind of an EIR at. So I worked for an organization called AI Fund, which is an AI-based investment fund created by Andrew Ng, who's a kind of world-renowned professor of AI out of Stanford. Kind of the original mission of that company was to do AI for customer support and sell it to companies. I thought that was an intriguing idea. I joined to try and turn it into a real business. What we kind of found as we went down that path is there were a lot of companies, including Salesforce, Oracle, others trying to do that exact same thing, with companies that already had business relationships with those vendors. And so what we heard in our market research, me and a couple people who were getting this company off the ground, the pain was actually more on the consumer side than on the company side, right? Companies are sort of like, hey, yeah, great, more automation to throw at, to try and make it hard for people to reach us. Consumers are like, I can't call Xfinity because my head explodes, right? Their level of frustration was so high that we sort of had this aha moment of like, wait, we should be building AI for consumers to make customer support easier with all the brands that they do business with than the inverse.
Yep.
And so we set out to do that. This was a company that, I think we were sort of biting off more than we could chew, in the sense that we felt like for it to be valuable to an end user, you wanted to be able to have all your vendors in one, Xfinity, Comcast, Wells Fargo, Visa, whatever it might be, all in one app. And so that's kind of what we aspired to build. Really interfacing with all those companies was hard. There was a lot of privacy and, security kind of issues that were challenges. I still believe, by the way, that somebody's going to build that app someday. It's going to be awesome. I hope they do.
We still need it.
But then we went into the pandemic. So as we were kind of pivoting that business, it became, sort of hard to raise money. And we said, all right, and for me personally, I was trying to get my novel written. And so I thought, hey, if this is the universe telling me to go become a writer instead of an entrepreneur. To answer the second part of your question about building a company for, sale versus to be a standalone business, this is not a unique answer, but I think it's true. And I think almost every investor and entrepreneur would tell you this, is you can't ever build a business to be acquired, right? Like that just isn't a formula that works. There are maybe a few exceptions. I remember Bebo famously sold itself to AOL. If you remember Bebo, one of the early social networking companies. So there's probably some examples that are counter to that. But in general, what acquiring companies want is something of value. If you're just sort of building a widget that they might want to add into their, set of widgets, it usually doesn't work. They're onto you. They'll get close and they'll end up replicating what you do. Focus on building a real company. I think if you build a real company, build a real business. The other thing I would say is that at exit time, go public, IPO, or, the more optionality you have, the better, right? So if you kind of package your business just to be sold, what leverage do you have? If that one buyer is like, no thanks, you have no ability to get a better price. You have no ability to force the deal. Your highest chance of acquisition is when you're a threat to exit via multiple pathways, because that gives you the benefit of having optionality, having a real business that you can stand up and continue to run. And then that really forces a would-be acquirer to pony up and pay a premium to get what you've got.
Yeah, I think I go back and forth on that idea quite a bit, and I think you're dead on. I think if you're building the right business and it is competitive and you are a threat and you have offers on the table, you're doing it right. And if you build it to have it be sold and you can't sell it, the worst thing that you could have done is build this business that you never wanted. I feel like if you built this business and you enjoy it and you love it and offers are coming in and you would like to sell, I feel like an exit almost validates it even more that it's valuable. To not be able to sell and be like, oh, I got to run this business for the next 3 years. I hate this. Like, that sounds miserable. So it's like almost back to your point.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying that selling a company is a bad idea. I think selling a company is in many ways a preferable exit to going public. Going public is hard. I'm not anti-acquisition. I'm sort of more anti-grooming the company to be an acquisition candidate. It's just hard. It's hard to know what a would-be acquirer would want. And again, I think if you go the path of making it a successful company, standalone company, that's what gives you the most leverage. By the way, I've been on that side quite a bit. I've been on the potential acquiring side and evaluating different companies. I will tell you from firsthand experience, you don't want to pay more, right? Mm-hmm. And so when a business is for sale and they have zero other options other than go out of business, what would you do, right? You're not going to offer a premium for that company. You know that they're over a barrel. The other old adage you hear about this is companies don't get sold, they get bought. If you put the for sale sign up on a company, it's probably a bad sign. It's probably game over. I won't mention it by name because they were a failed business, but I acquired the assets of a company that they were hoping to do that. They put it up for sale, nobody bought. Then they put the assets up for sale, nobody bought. I finally bought for, an amount of money that I could write a personal check for and use that as the basis for an entire business that I founded. And on the sell side of that transaction, that was torture, right? They probably paid more in fees to the bankers than they made off the transaction. So you got to have something that people want. And the way to have something that people want is to have a strong, vibrant, standalone company.
Companies aren't sold, they're bought. That is so
These are the kind of nuggets of wisdom.
Yes. That is so rich and good. I'm definitely pro exit, 100%. I want to know some about the internal politics of Silicon Valley. I want to know what goes down behind the scenes that I'm not seeing. You lived through it, and I know BitFlip speaks to it. What are some of those things? I'm trying to think of a specific idea, and I feel like maybe perhaps it's like public facing things with investors when there's actually personal ambitions underlying most of deals or something like that. Is there?
Yeah.
I'm making the dark side.
First, I'll do a shameless plug for that book. BitFlip was my debut novel, came out in August of 22. It's not really autobiographical isn't the right term, but it's based on my experiences as an executive and founder and entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. For me, it was that title, BitFlip, was a double entendre. So of course, in coding terms, a bit is a 0 or a 1, and when it changes, it's a bit flip. So kind of was using that metaphorically to talk to a change of heart, which is what I went through a little bit as I kind of decided to largely exit the tech industry and had some misgivings about the industry that I loved and came to California to do. But also the protagonist in the book goes through a little bit of a change of heart, a lot of it a change of heart on his journey. I think some of the things that new entrepreneurs who haven't done venture-backed companies, venture investing is kind of held aloft on this pinnacle. Like all the companies that we revere, all were venture-backed companies, Google, Meta, Tesla, on and on down the list. That predisposes entrepreneurs to feeling like that's the way to, get to a successful exit is to go pitch Sand Hill Road VCs and go get money, and once I do, it'll be happily ever after. As I mentioned, a lot of companies aren't really venture fundable businesses. And so I think if yours is not, you need to be honest with yourself and either fund the business a different way or change the business model, to make it more compelling to a venture investor. So that's sort of the first hurdle you have to get through. The second thing that a lot of first-time entrepreneurs don't realize is that once you take on a venture investor, you really, really change the dynamic of the business dramatically. Even if you maintain a majority stake, which often is not the case, past to Series A, by the way, but even if you do manage to do that, which to do, you need to have strong customer traction, a product in the market, first revenue. There's a lot of milestones that you need to have hit, even by your Series A, to maintain control. Even if you have the voting control, you kind of don't have control anymore, right? You in many ways become a real business at that point. What do I mean by that? A real business has corporate governance. It has a board of directors. It has shares issued. You don't just make decisions by edict anymore. You make decisions by, vote in theory, even though, that rarely comes to a head on issues of importance. But fundamentally, you've changed the dynamic of what you are. You are now a corporation fully, even if your tax documents said you were a corporation before that. Generally, if you're doing it right, a new investor at least or two in each round. And so before you know it, you have 3, 4, 5 investors around the table. And that's the exact dynamic that I depict in BitFlip. And it's one that I've lived through at several companies, which is the incentives you realize or you can discover may become slightly misaligned at that point. A venture investor, if you put the perspective of that person on, has to think about their fund and how long their fund's going to last, when they need to pay out to their limited partners, what their political capital is within the fund. Are they a founding partner who can really, has a lot of sway, or are they a junior partner who has to kind of follow along? So there's a lot of internal dynamics that the venture partner who's, usually on your board, usually one will be named as a board member, or they'll have rights to a board seat, can have incentives for you to exit, sell, for you to do another round of financing, for the way you operate your business. Because let's face it, once that venture fund writes that check, they are really invested. I can never remember the quote about the pigs and the eggs and the breakfast and one's committed or whatever. Do you know what saying I'm talking about? What's the difference between the pig and the chicken? The pig is committed.
Oh yeah.
The venture investor doesn't get their money out. It's either goes to zero, or they get pennies on the dollar, or they get an exit, right?
Yeah.
The founder even and the other executives at that company, even though they're mired in it day to day, they're inspired by it every day, they kind of have the freedom to leave at any point. If they lose faith in that business, they can say, hey, I quit. I'm going to go do something else. VCs don't really have that. Once they write that check, they're in the game with that business until the bitter end, unless they find a way to sell their stake, which they rarely do. And so, when you understand that dynamics and you think about it from a venture investor's perspective, which I hadn't done when I was an early entrepreneur, I didn't get those dynamics, and they're very real. They really, really matter greatly about where the company is going to go, whether you're going to be able to raise more money, whether you're going to be able to hire executives, whether you're going to be able to invest in growth, whether you're going to have to hunker down and do layoffs. All those things hinge on what your investors need out of the business. And so understanding those and not being afraid to ask those questions as an entrepreneur is really important.
A lot of great nuggets in there, Mike. I did hear this one horror story of somebody that started a successful business, then they brought in a board, and then eventually the board kicked him out because he gave away too much. And I feel like a lot of things that I hear around building a board around you and then being dictated and forced into certain avenues if you're not in the right position to navigate your own business scares me deeply.
It really is a marriage, kind of way to think about it, right? I think that personality fit is an important thing to consider when you're taking on an investor. I do think some entrepreneurs can over-index to control. And by that, I mean, if you are bringing in the right investors, they want you to succeed. They're not out to get you. They will be trying to give you the best advice they can to help you succeed. More often than not, venture investors have seen a lot of stuff go down at different companies. They may not know the details of your company, but they know the market for businesses like yours. Yeah. They know the dynamics that happen in early stage companies. They've seen it a lot. They've often been entrepreneurs themselves, most of the good ones. If you're thinking ahead of like, hey, if it's me or him and I'm going to get outvoted, I'm going to get ousted from my own company, that's probably a warning sign that you might not be, partnering up with the right person. It's like somebody who feels like they need to get the prenup before they get married, right? Like that's a red flag, right? Like you kind of want that relationship to feel like one like, hey, I totally trust this person. They are my ride or die. Like we're going to make this thing a success together. I'm going to trust their advice. They're going to be a sounding board for me. That's the kind of relationship you want out of an early investor, especially a venture investor who's taken 20, 30, 50% of your business. Conversely, like I said before, they are in it no matter what. Yeah. So at that point, their capital's in it. They've got to follow that thing to fruition. So I do think some VCs are a little early with the trigger finger if they feel like a founder is not listening, is being too obstinate, is driving the business into the ground, or more often has an interpersonal dynamic flaw, whatever, that is creating angst and strife within the company. That's actually the most common thing. It's their fiduciary responsibility at some level to get the right executive into the company. And no venture investor will tell you that they want to invest in something where they think upon their initial investment that they need to swap out the CEO. It is a very common bridge that businesses have to cross. It is a very short list of founder CEOs who were good as a founder and good at that stage and also good at later stage, right? Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, there aren't that many people who can, navigate the ship through all those different stretches because the skill set that you need in those leaders is so vastly different. Don't assume that you're the next Mark Zuckerberg. Assume that you probably will need a transition. You probably do want to go in and be thoughtful about, hey, if I were not the CEO, if I'm the founder, if I were not the CEO, is there another role? Would I be the chief technical officer? Should I be the chief sales leader or revenue officer? There's different roles that can be a great fit for founders when it is time to bring in, a quote unquote more professional CEO. Let me be honest. I've seen that fail miserably too. I've been at companies where new CEOs were brought in and it just wasn't a fit. That the employees didn't find inspiration from that person. The strategy fell off to them. The interpersonal dynamics were broken. A lot of things that can go wrong at that transition. It's not an easy one. But, in general, I think a lot of entrepreneurs would be well served to sort of almost the right way I'd think about the question is like, what do I need to do to be good at the next stage, right? And can I develop the skills and expertise? Can I get the coaching? Can I get the mentorship that will prepare me to take that next step? Or if not, either I can't develop the skills or I don't like doing those things that are required at the next stage, then like being okay with, sort of passing the baton to somebody else who can take it and genuinely supporting that person. And like, that's when that transition actually works, is if there's an established trust and recognition that is a natural evolution of a business.
Rather than somebody getting appointed, not having the same vision, not understanding the culture and the people and being able to like resonate with what's going on internally. Yeah, that seems like it'd be a mess.
Where I think venture investors can make mistakes on this question. It's kind of like, the car's not winning the race. Is the car's problem or the driver's problem, right? And so a lot of venture investors will assume it's the driver's problem. Like, hey, if we just get a different CEO in there, everything's going to be hunky-dory. I'm sort of dating myself with the phrase hunky-dory. Sorry about that. But everything will be good to go. Usually, they kind of have their heads in the sand about a more foundational, fundamental problem with the business that isn't really going to be solved by bringing a CEO in. And so, the dynamic that I've seen there is they bring a CEO in too early. It sort of upsets everybody in the founding team and frankly, sometimes everybody in the entire company. They pay that person a lot of money because there's risk in the business, and that oftentimes those more seasoned executives aren't willing to step into something strictly for stock. And so they burn through a lot of capital. New CEOs trying to get up to speed on the business, they don't know that the engine is flawed or the carburetor is broken or the wheels need replacing or whatever it is. People who actually know those things are oftentimes the employees and the founders who've been at that company who'd have the best chance to sort of diagnose what's wrong with the vehicle. But the CEO kind of comes in, starts to do edicts and thinks he or she knows what to do, but has to get up a learning curve of their own about figuring out the business. Frankly, the better thing to do in those scenarios is to just take a step back, right? To say, okay, all right, let's not add to the problem by getting more cooks in the kitchen. Let's take a step back, give this company a little bit more breathing room. Oftentimes that's going to require budget adjustments, maybe more capital than the investors thought, but let's get back to brass tacks. Do we have product market fit? Do we have a business that, that flywheel can start to go? Then let's bring in higher powered executives to take it to the next level.
Super valuable. Mike, I got one last question for you.
All right, fire away.
But before I ask it, I'm going to acknowledge you for all that you're doing. Thank you for taking the time and coming on here and sharing your wisdom around all these things. Like all of your experiences, so obvious you've reflected on these things and know these things to be true. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing these things. We've had 2 experiences together. My perspective of you is you're so kind, so patient, a very caring person. I can tell that you've talked about your management positions in the past, and I can tell you care about people. So we'll acknowledge you for who you are as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The final question of the podcast is, what does it mean to live a fulfilling life?
And I'll answer it a little bit in the context of, the subject of your show, subject of our conversation around entrepreneurship. Obviously, happy life, finding, a partner that you can spend your life with is critical to that. And, children and all the family aspects are first, second, and third on my list. But on the professional front, I really think that the mistake I made maybe early in my career was to focus too much on the outcome. We talked at the start of the show about, a successful outcome that I had. And that was great, but it had a lot of downsides. It wasn't everything that it was sort of cracked up to be. Sort of what I ended up taking away from that. First of all, I had many great, close professional friends that I've been in touch with for the subsequent 20 plus years. That for me was really a enjoy the journey, don't worry about the destination kind of moment. I think as I've advanced in my career, I've gotten better at the companies that I've been at that I reflect on with the most warm feelings and positive sentiment. Didn't have anything to do whether that company was a successful exit or not. It had everything to do with the people I was working with, the teams I was on, just sort of enjoying the journey, enjoying the process on a day-to-day basis and finding fulfillment in that. And I think if you go to bed every night and feel like, hey, I had a fun day, I enjoyed what I did today, that's a great, great feeling. And it's one that you can control a lot more than you can control selling for billions of dollars, right? That's largely out of your control. It depends a lot on luck. Even if it happens, there can be some negatives to it as well. So that's the takeaway. Enjoy the journey.
Love it. I dig it. Where can people find your book? Bitflip, Burner, third one on the way. Where can we see?
Third one on the way. Yeah, so Burner is my second novel. It comes out April 16th, 2024, in case people are listening to this in the future. You can find it all the usual places. Amazon, of course, encourage people to buy from their local bookstores. It's available on every local bookstore should have a copy at least that they can order if they don't have it in stock. And you can get more information about me and my other scribblings on my website, miketrigg.com with 2 Gs. I have links to information about my books. I did a video series in support of the first book where I went to different places that featured prominently in the novel. So that's fun to check out. Media coverage, blog posts, etc. That's all on my site.
All those links will be in the show notes. Go check him out. Go say hello to Mike. Find him on LinkedIn. Tell him how much you loved his book after you read it. Mike, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Nick. We'll talk soon.
That was the episode. You just listened to it. Mike Trigg uncovered through his fascinating journey the intricacies of Silicon Valley, the dynamic shifts in technology, and the art of leadership, because he's someone who has truly lived it. Great episode. I'll toot Mike's horn. Hopefully he hears this. I'm tooting your horn, Mike. What are you going to do about it? Just kidding. Do not slap me with a lawsuit. Be sure to subscribe for more insightful conversations here on The Nicholas Talley Show. We post every Friday at 6 a.m. But the real reason you're still here is you want to know the answer to the riddle of the week. How do you make a waterbed bouncier? Add spring water, baby. Until next time, keep pushing those boundaries. Strive for more. You can accomplish it. Believe in yourself. You have to believe in yourself more than anyone else does, all right? Remember that. See you next Friday at 6 a.m. Bye.